Hey, Whiskey Ringers. I am thrilled to welcome back Impex Beverages as the Whiskey Ring Podcast presenting sponsor. Each month, we'll be talking about a new set of single casks, maybe feature a chosen distillery, or single cask from a chosen distillery. Listen for the mid-roll for more info on this month's offerings. And now, a brand new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today, we're going back over to Scotland, and we're going to a little area that I really have very little familiarity with, which are the, I guess you would call them the lowland region, but the upper lowlands. And we're going to be talking about Lochlea Distillery with Mr. John Campbell himself. John, welcome.
Hi, Dave. How are you doing?
Doing well. Great to have you on. So, Lochlea is, as we're talking right now, we're recording on December 18th. And so it'll be a few weeks before this episode comes out. But I was quite excited to get you on for multiple reasons. One being you just won a slew of awards. It is award season, of course. I got the chance to pick up a couple of the newer releases, the Harvest Edition, the Our Barley Edition, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And in my own year-end awards, Lochlea will be, let's say, making its presence known in a couple of categories. So I was very excited to have you on. We're also recording literally minutes after Argentina has won the World Cup. So congratulations to those supporting Argentina. Sorry to literally the entire rest of the world. But we will go forward. So jumping right in. Let's start with Lochlea itself. The vision for what this distillery is meant to be.
No, that's a good question. And so Lochlea is a farm distillery in the truest essence, I guess. It's like all the barley is grown on the farm. We don't have a floor maltings as yet, so we malt it off-site, but the barley's stored on the farm until it gets sent away to be malted. All the other, like once it's malted, we'll take it back to the distillery, we'll store it in bins, and then we will start to process it through the plant. The distillery itself is small, I would say, definitely in comparison to a world I would have known previously. It only processes about 10 tons a week. So that's normally one mash in a normal Scottish distillery. So it is more like, everyone says it's craft, but like it's more leaning towards small kind of batches, 2-ton mashes, Monday to Friday. So it processes that through. It's then all stored in either first fill bourbon or European oak on site as well. And then we will process all the liquid on site, ready to be bottled at a contractor as well. So only from Lochlea's point of view, then it'll come back to the site. So it only really goes off site twice, to be malted and to be bottled. And areas we're looking at ourselves as well, but it's like 30 barrels a week. It's not a lot of production at Lochlea. We are pushing to keep it that way, but as much as possible. It's all as I guess we won an award last week, and it was all to do with the fact that everything's done on the farm, and that's probably our most favourite award so far this year.
And just jumping back to your own story, as you said, it's a completely different world from the one you inhabited previously. While at Laphroaig, dealing with massive volumes of whiskey production, storage, sales as well. When I was doing research for this episode, one of the ones I leaned heavily on was your interview with One Nation Under Whiskey. And that was back in February of this year.
Yeah.
Or I guess if you're listening, February of 2022, I should say. And at that time, the move was still relatively fresh. I mean, you'd come on in like November.
Yep, that's correct.
And one of the things that you said at the time was that the move didn't even occur to you until, or the possibility of a move didn't occur to you until lockdown happened. And add into that at Laphroaig, you're dealing with, as you put it, 200 years of history on your shoulders. At Lochlea, you can start from scratch, really, from that. So, that was your feeling about 2 to 3 months after joining. What are your feelings now? Have they changed? Have they evolved since then as well?
Yeah, no, they're somewhat similar, but equally they are evolving as well. And I think it's to do with the fact that everyone's evolving at Lochlea. So we are starting to use the whole team and building their confidence and the skills that they need to have to be in whisky, I guess. So we are starting to lean more in that now as well. So it's definitely much more of a team effort now than it would have been maybe just because I guess I just had the experience. So like I'm trying to, like, I guess the thing is now is passing on your experience and training and developing the team. And that's been a big part of what we've done over the last almost year, David. So that's the thing you really want to try and do more than anything else. It's just because I guess nowhere can be reliant on one person. So that's the thing. And it's just, we built the Lochlea way, I guess, over the last 9 months or so. So that to me is really the exciting bit as well, because now it's what Lochlea does. It's not just, we're, I guess, wandering in the dark, wondering what can be. We know who we are now. We know what the style of whiskey we want to create is. This is who we are. So it's just like MD can measure us against that now. So I guess that's the good progress we've made over the last 9 months or so.
And from the beginning, or at least certainly from the beginning of setup and production, Lochlea has been blessed, if you will, with some real heavy hitters from the Scotch whiskey industry. Whether it's yourself coming over, also previously Malcolm Rennie with experience, and we'll talk a little bit more about Malcolm as well. But you're bringing in from Laphroaig, he's coming in from Kilchoman, Ardbeg, Bruichladdich, so many big name distilleries that also have a strong reputation for knowing how to do things, creating the style and following a style that they like. And in writing up my review of the first release, the Sowing Edition,
yep,
I was a bit skeptical at first because it was my first taste of the distillery. And I said, there's no red flags. There's nothing, no alarm bells going off, but it's also like it almost shouldn't be this good at it's 3 years old. It's a brand new distillery. And yet off the bat, you've got something that's not only drinkable, which is its own bar, but also quite good at the same time. So I guess the question that I'm taking the long route to get to is simply when you were still at Laphroaig, but open to the idea of moving to another distillery, be it Lochlea or another,
okay.
What was the pitch made to you in terms of, again, that vision, and not only what the team in place wanted to do, but what they wanted you to do if you came in?
That's a good question. I guess the best way to answer that is for me to use my experience, because that's, I guess, the page I'm at in my story is just like, I've got all that experience now. I know exactly how to do things, what you want, how you want it. Like, I can do that. Like, if you want a fruitier spirit, if you want a grassier spirit, if you want a maybe a more drier spirit, if you want a kind of more florally spirit. Like, I can tell you how to get all these things. So I guess that was the first thing that we kind of looked at into understanding. And one of the first things I did was interview everyone that worked on the team. Tell me about Lochlea, tell me the character, how would it be if it was a human being? Like, all of these questions, just pushing and pushing and pushing to truly understand like what Lochlea is. And so we've developed that over this year as well, and we've really honed in on that. And so I would say we're probably more in tune with that now, and we've tried to create the liquids like that. Sowing was okay, I would say. So I'm glad you think it was good. I thought it was okay, but I think our barley and harvest, which you will be getting now, are much better versions of Lochlea than and we're just building and building and building our character, and it will keep growing and growing and growing, I feel, as time progresses as well.
And without getting too deep into these two really all three products right away, the newer ones, Harvest and Our Barley, had not only the addition of more time, but they had casks added to their maturation process that the Sowing Edition didn't. It was very, if you will, just straightforward. It was, ex-bourbon. And so I agree with you in that the latter two are a step forward for sure, but there was value for me as a reviewer, certainly, of tasting the Sowing and saying, this is the spirit. There's nothing hiding it. It's clear ex-bourbon. This is what it is, and everything else can be built off of that.
No, I understand that totally, and you'll find that even with Crop 2 Sowing, which we've bottled recently as well, you'll find it's a step up as well, because we're just building and understanding more and more. The more we can question ourselves at the distillery, the more we understand who we are, and so we're really pushing on these fronts. So I think Crop 2 Sowing, you'll find, is a slightly different flavour, and it'll have more depth in it as well. So like, we're building the depth and the spirit. That's something we've really pushed for over the last year. So that's good. And it's coming. It is coming more and more, and I think we'll build on that even looking forward. And we know the projects we're wanting to do in 2023, and we know what's going to take, and we know kind of what we need to do. So yeah, no, it's good, I guess. We've got that clarity of the steps, I guess, now that we need to take moving forward. So as in, we're in kind of year 4 now, just over year 4. So like, we understand what the spirit's going to be evolving like. We need to take the consumer along on this journey as well, and we've got some interesting things lined up for the consumer coming in 2023 as well, just to show that development.
I'm a consumer. I'm excited, and I'll be keeping an eye out for it for sure. And thankfully, being in New York, I get pretty good distribution for them.
Yep.
But if you're a friend of the podcast, I'm always happy to help you find things if I can. So with the style itself, as I kind of alluded to in the intro, of the major regions in Scotland, Lowland is probably the region I'm least familiar with. Whether it's Lowland, and I'm including in Lowland the islands nearby, Arran, Campbelltown, Yep. So in various interviews, I've kind of heard a balance emerge, one where it's a Lowland distillery. There's some elements of Lowland character, but also it's not exactly Lowland. So how would you describe what the spirit is, like what category it might fall into, or what it's meant to exhibit?
Yeah, no, it's definitely Lowlands. I mean, with that's the region, that's where we're from, it's who we are. I think what consumers need to understand is Lowland has upped its game the most, probably of all the regions over the last probably 4 to 5 years. There is more, I guess, new distilleries in this region than there is maybe anywhere else. That's probably fair to say as well. There's some really exciting whiskies, some whiskies that are really, really pushing, because Lowland would be generally known as a blending malt. And for most people, up until probably 10 years ago, you might be able to say 2 or 3 Lowland malts off the top of your head, but you wouldn't have known as many as you would maybe Speysides or Islays or Highland distilleries. So I think it's a moving region. It's a coming region, because a lot of the distilleries are doing really good work in this region as well. It's young, so it's coming forward fast. It's kind of, I would say it's developed its character more from a blending single malt, where you might have got some grassy notes and just it was kind of inoffensive and quite bland, to really rich and deep flavoured whiskies that will match probably anything in Scotland in 20 years' time, I feel. So like that's what we're pushing for at Lochlea. We want to get the most depth in our new spirit, so that when we add it to the good casks, that, well, it's can't go wrong, really. It's going to be good liquid in whatever age we release it at. So that's the vision, that's the purpose, I guess. Then that's what we will be trying to do. And I know a lot of the other distillers in the region whom I speak to are really focused on delivering from that point of view, because I guess historically Lowlands doesn't have that reputation versus most of the other regions.
And you mentioned Lowland was also, it had an association with blending for a long time. And up until, I had to look this up, but up until 2009 in Kilmarnock, correct my pronunciations at any time, by the way.
It's okay.
Johnny Walker had their main blending facility.
Yep.
Right there. It was for 189 years they had it there. So is it in some ways fair to say that the Lowland region was in the shadow of that facility being there?
Well, it's an interesting angle, and to a certain degree, I guess, because like Johnny Walker is so big, it's massive. It's like, I don't know, is there any other brand like it, like across all spirits categories? I don't think there is. It's huge. The volume. It's a peated whiskey. It's unbelievable what it does, Johnny Walker, for the whole of the Scotch whiskey industry. And so, yeah, it's blazing a trail, and we're all tucked in behind it, I guess, and metaphorically, but because it does open boundaries, it opens markets and gets people involved in whiskey that may not be, and then interest develops, and then you start breaking down, like even the regions, and say a Johnny Walker, and then there's some Lowland in it, there's some Highland, there's some Islay, there's some and then you think, oh right, I want to start exploring regions, and so you start exploring the regions, get the feeling of the region itself, and then just you drill down and you might like certain whiskies in Islay, you might like certain whiskies in Highland, Speyside, Lowlands, and then it just develops. And I know my journey has been somewhat like that, I guess slightly less because I just started working in whiskey so young, I guess, but I think most people follow a journey kind of like that. So yeah, I think Lowlands would have been synonymous with blends, because you would have had most of the blending shops back in the day would have been in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Kilmarnock, places like that. The kind of the teachers, the ushers, the Perth, all of these like places. So yeah, no, definitely, I can understand why you think that, and I guess that's why we're all trying to change the viewpoint of Lowlands, and generally I think it's been undervalued, and I think that viewpoint is about to change.
I mean, certainly among my friends who are more versed in lowland whiskey than I am, the names are becoming more venerated. So the Adams, the Springbanks, and their value, both monetary and otherwise, is exploding. To put it bluntly, but yeah, it seems like they've only kind of come out of the shadow in the last decade, slightly decade plus, and it's been wonderful to see. I mean, between the releases and finishes that Isle of Arran did with the different wine casks, using for a brief period bare barley before Bruichladdich took that project over, if you will. It's exciting, and I love the idea that there are more distilleries opening there now to expand the profile. So, bringing that back to Lochlea, the one of the things that was one of the many things that were unique about this distillery is, despite production beginning in 2018, being founded in 2014, it was really kept quite under wraps until Whiskey Magazine did a feature in 2020, 2021. And at which point, Malcolm was featured, the team at the time was featured, obviously pre your tenure there, but it was really kept, as I said, under wraps. And I'm curious, perhaps not only are other distilleries that are opening up following suit, yeah, let's just keep with that one question. Are other distilleries you're seeing popping up following suit with that kind of mindset?
And it has a different mindset because it's quite hard, because all of a sudden you can get all the razzmatazz. There's a new distillery, whoop whoop whoop. All the kind of poppers go off, and then all of a sudden, okay, we'll see you in 3 years, because that's the legal, I guess, laws that we have to kind of abide to. So it's very hard to keep attention for 3 years before you say, ta-da, here we are, and here's what we can show you so far of our journey. So I think Lochlea just decided, well, we'll just stay quiet until we've got something to shout about. So it is hard. It's a very, and it's a very finance driven business as well, whiskey, because it is, you're like, even right now we are planning 25, 30 years away, and so that's cost right now that you won't see return on for 30 years. So like, you have to plan for that, and so it's very hard not to sit in something for 29 years before you're going to make money. Although when it does come, you can make plenty of money, but it's still it's a big financial commitment. So that's, I guess, why companies have taken the route of, let's do a gin, let's do this, let's do that, because you have to keep the finances ticking over, to keep laying down, so that you do have 10 and 20 and 30-year-olds in due course. So yeah, it's tough. It is tough, and it's all financial commitment. So I guess that's why, I guess maybe some people have seen what we've done and went, oh, that's an interesting angle, slightly different. And so, yeah, it's almost like when you've got legal age whiskey, now we can start talking, because you can start talking, because it's hard for everyone if there's no whiskey, really.
Sure. I mean, your colleague, yeah, your colleague David Ferguson said it really well. He said, he didn't want to run out of things to say about the whiskey before you could actually taste it, or at least before, maybe not before you could taste it, before you could legally call it Scotch whiskey. Because of course you can taste it before then, but if you're on site, but you can't call it that, as you said, until 3 years old. So it was just an interesting, I look at distilleries in the US that are popping up, and very, very few kind of follow that. And even the ones that There are ones that, as you said, put out gin or vodka or non-aged spirits. There are a couple that have decided, okay, we're only going to do whiskey, but have still kind of spoken or started talking before the whiskey is ready, or even before they've started to sell it. But they're very few, really. It's really about either are you going to sell stuff in between, or stay silent in between. And for whatever reason, I feel like distilleries in the US have this spotlight on them right now, where perhaps ones in Scotland, which are no less deserving of a spotlight, might be able to hide, for lack of a better term. You know, I can't, I guess it's saying I can't imagine if Lochlea were in the US, for example, or like they just, you know, started in Kentucky or even a non-major state for whiskey. You know, someone would start talking about it, whether it's, doesn't have to be your team, the Lochlea team, but someone would start talking, oh, there's this new distillery, they're growing grain, they're doing this. So it was a fascinating difference of what you guys
and
were
I
able to
think
do.
it's the fact that we don't do tours either. You can't come and visit the site even now. It's just it's a production site, and we're producing whiskey. You can't come and take a tour of Lochlea, so we've still got that kind of mystique or aura about us. The fact that like you just like, even if you wanted to, you can't come and visit. So. And we're not ready for visitors in any shape or form. We just don't have the facilities. We don't have the team to support that. But it is slightly different because most people will start to do tours, start to do tasting, start to do income, show you and it's all open up front. Whereas even now, Lochlea is still a bit of a mystery, because you can't just turn up because. And I think this is the thing that maybe people don't understand is like the actual size of the place. It's so small. It is so small. It's like, and I guess maybe the best way to explain it is like if we do compare head to head with my old lovely place at Laphroaig. Laphroaig does in 8 hours what Lochlea does in a week. It's a completely different scale, and it's just like it's just completely different. So it's awesome.
And I suppose also there's, with the growth of whiskey tourism worldwide, you couldn't really have a distillery in the US. It's just almost impossible to have one where you don't have a visitor center. You know, everything's on Google Maps, everything's there. But I'm curious also, being basically within an hour's drive from Glasgow to the shore. I know that the company's vision is to have a visitor center or an ability to visit way down the line. But do you find yourself tempted to tease people and be like, well, you know, we're only an hour away, or we're only a short drive away, just give us a few years and you can come back?
No, it's not who we are right now, I guess. And it's funny it's easy, the answer to this, and it's just no, not yet. It's a farm. So like it really is a farm. And it's not like in inverted commas farm distillery. It is a farm. So like you literally drive up a track to get to the distillery. So we just couldn't take visitors. There's no car park. It's just there's a place where we put the barrels, and it's just like it is. You can see pictures on social media and stuff like that. It really is like it is that small. It is like it's quite hard to explain this, and it's in the middle of nowhere as well. And you're right, it's a 35-minute drive from Glasgow because I stay in Glasgow, and I drive to work, and it's 35 minutes. It's not that far away, and it's literally an 8-minute drive from Kilmarnock, which we've already mentioned in in this chat. So like it isn't far away from major towns, major cities, but it's up in the hills. And it's to be honest, it's if you've ever been to Kentucky and you're listening, it's kind of like Kentucky, like the way maybe if you're driving up to Maker's Mark or something like that. It's kind of like that, the landscape, honest, because you're in a valley, and then you're moving up and through the kind of the hills, up, and then you just get this. You wouldn't even know it was a distillery. You could drive past the end of the road and you wouldn't know it was a distillery. And most people wouldn't understand that. So it will come, and we will develop the site hopefully to be able to show people what we're up to in the future. But it's it's so small. Like the walk from the entrance of, say, the malt where we take our malt in to where we put the spirit out, 50 meters max. It's tiny. It is tiny, and that includes mashing, 6 washbacks, 2 stills, and through a wall into the filling store. It isn't a big site.
It makes in 10 years time it'll make a short but lovely tour. So but we'll check back in 10 years time on that. So we'll switch gears a little bit now, going to the site itself, and I think no better place to start than, as you said, it's the farm. It's a 222 acre farm, I believe, and all the barley grown and used is grown on the farm.
Yep.
And pardon me. So the first thing is just to touch on is the style of barley that you're using now. You're using all laureate barley, correct?
Yes. Yep.
And I think you have been using concerto a little bit before, but kind of settled on laureate.
Yep.
So what was it about the two different styles that in doing the Lochlea process and distilling them led you to choose, all right, this is the one that I think makes the most sense for the character we want to achieve?
Yeah, no, and that's a really, really, again, good question, because it's more. This is more about probably the farming side and the technical side of farming rather than the technical side of distilling, because the laureate is just more robust. It can take different weather. We are at Lochlea more towards the west coast, so you do get more weather fluctuations than you would say on the east coast, which isn't that far away, but it does have a completely different climate. So it's just more robust to the vagaries of west coast weather, I guess. So that's probably why laureate more than anything else. The depth, like, I guess, terroir, I guess, for a bit, we don't understand that 100% yet either. It is something we will understand fully going forward when we're starting experiments in that next year, where we will start to understand what difference it makes growing barley in Ayrshire and growing barley at Lochlea up in the hills in Ayrshire versus somewhere down at the coast. We have done an interesting experiment this year where we malted the barley on the site as well. So we do have a small amount of liquid maturing away in our warehouse now that's fully done on site. So we've started these processes to try and understand like what difference it makes growing in Ayrshire versus, I guess, in the valley and in Glasgow or over in Islay or up north in Aberdeenshire. So we are starting to hopefully move towards understanding what Ayrshire and being growing in the lowlands means.
And that kind of preempts a question I was going to ask. And I don't always use the term terroir. I'm not sure if people are always comfortable with it. I let my guests kind of lead that one. I know in a separate interview, David had kind of obliquely referred to the terroir question of what does distilling and growing in Ayrshire mean. And he also kind of obliquely related to, I believe it was Waterford Distillery in Ireland, where they're, you know, taking from all these different farms and distilling one at a time and seeing what that means. But I'm quite excited to hear that, you know, you're experimenting with that. It makes it sound, I feel like I make it sound sometimes like it's a requirement for distilleries to test out their terroir. It's not at all in my mind, but it does excite me to hear that you're testing things out like that, because who knows, it could be a whole different character, and as long as it matches the character that you want to create, then all the better. That does lead me to ask, I do want to just hear more about what does the climate of Ayrshire look like. You mentioned the fluctuations, of course, but just kind of year round.
Yeah, so I guess it's different. Even like I stay in Glasgow, which is 35 minutes away, and it's a different valley basically. So I would say Glasgow, from my 1 year's experience, versus Lochlea, Glasgow gets hotter when it's hotter and colder when it's colder. So like in the summer, you can be leaving Lochlea and it's maybe 20 Celsius, 25 Celsius. You get to Glasgow and it's above 30 Celsius. In the winter, it's -2 at Lochlea. You get to Glasgow, it's -11. So that's what we've had last week. So it's just like that 1 year's experience there. So I'm not sure that really amounts to much, but it just seems like the weather in the different valleys is different. There's probably more rain in the Glasgow Valley than there is in the Ayrshire Valley as well. So that will probably slightly affect things too. So yeah, no, it is strange how you pay attention to these details the older you get, and I guess the more you understand about what that means, what the weather means to the liquid you're creating as well. So because it just does, like the colder it gets, sometimes you get these really nice floral notes coming through in your spirit character that can only be attributed to that really, really sharp cold weather. And they're nice to see, actually. Just again, depth. It's all about depth of flavour. I'll bore people to death about pushing on depth and depth and depth, but that is something that it adds to depth. So I know, like previously we had, like, you would get the same at Laphroaig. You'd get nice kind of floral notes coming through in the winter. So what you would do, you would actually marry different casks together: summer, winter, autumn, spring casks, different heights and warehouse, different kind of points, different kind of strengths, so that you would build up to depth through all of these different things as well. And that's, I guess, the art of blending, which we are now doing at Lochlea. We're trying to get all of the variations that are possible and understand all them, and that's something we've still got a bit of work to do, but try and push them into the liquid as well, so that people can understand that depth and the full potential of what Lochlea can be.
I do have to ask also, just as a side note to your history at Laphroaig, I know some of the finishing casks used at Lochlea have been executed. Many of them, purely coincidence, have been from 10-year-old Laphroaig casks. But on kind of a day-to-day basis, do you miss at all working with the peat that you used to work with?
I miss Laphroaig. You'll always miss Laphroaig. Laphroaig is awesome. And I miss a lot of the people that work at Laphroaig as well. So like you build, like if you've been at somewhere for nearly 30 years, you build deep and kind of meaningful relationships with people who have definitely been there that time too. So yeah, you miss all of these things. Do I miss peat? I don't know. Like, I don't think about it like that. It's more like, it was funny when there was Laphroaig casks there. It was just very funny to me, because like, well, I know what I'm looking for here. So I know what Laphroaig looks like. I'm trying to understand what Lochlea feels like, and we need to get the balance of both when we use these casks. So yeah.
And it provides a good segue to jump into the process as well. So, and it's also jumping to the end of the process too. But going into the casks, before we go into the Laphroaig and Maker's Mark connection a little more, I do want to ask, what the warehousing looks like right now. Like, how are you storing barrels, and how are you planning to store barrels?
Yeah, no. So there's 3 warehouses on site right now, and we just built a third one this year, and full size. So normally it'll be kind of racked warehousing that we will do. We do have a lot of traditional warehousing as well, dunnage style warehousing, and it's a small amount of kind of palletized warehouse as well, mainly for refills. So like we will use refills in the future, mainly because the reason for that is you want Lochlea power in your older whiskies. So like we are filling some of that for like an 18-year-old or 25-year-old. They'll be all in refill casks.
Right. You want something that's going to build, as you said, the depth of the whiskey without overpowering it, especially if you've spent 20 years making the whiskey what it is and letting it mature to a certain point. You don't want it to be blown out of the water at the last minute.
Yeah, no, we don't want the cask to win ever. Like I am very sensitive to casks winning in whiskey. Like it's just that's probably my biggest sensitivity is dry and wood in whiskey. I really don't like that. So like, yeah, I'm going to be probably maybe over cautious on that point of view, because I know people do like dry flavors in whiskey as well, and they add to the depth, but it won't be too dry with me ever, I don't think.
And I am so happy to hear you say that. I have been searching for someone to say that because I'm the same way. Honestly, my biggest sensitivity with whiskey is I don't want it to taste woody. I'm okay with oak pepperiness, oak creaminess, but once it tastes like you're chewing on a stave, it's too much. And then add into that the flavorings that you can have from whether a sherry cask or something other than the next bourbon, let's say. I want to be able to taste the whiskey underneath, and that goes back to the point about even if the initial Sowing Edition was not the final product, if you will, it does give a sense of what is the actual whiskey underneath. What does that taste like? And then everything else you can go off of that. But without knowing that base, then it can just get hidden behind wood and finishings and all of that. So I'm so glad to hear someone, let alone someone of your stature, say something that aligned with kind of my feeling on cask use in whiskey. So the next question with that is, so you have 3 warehouses, dunnage, palletized, being on the West Coast, getting the airflow off of the bay. I'd imagine you're also kind of planning for a bit of, let's say, salinity to come in, or something else from the air.
Yeah, no, that's the bit we're still to find out. It was funny as well, because even like with, I keep coming back to my experience at Laphroaig, but I've got a lot of experience at Laphroaig. It was between 6 and 13 years the salinity really came into Laphroaig. It wasn't there in younger ones, so it's something that might develop over time. And we aren't 6 years old yet, so in maybe a couple of years that type of flavour will start to develop coming through. Yeah, so yeah, it is. It's really interesting. It's we are trying to fast forward in so many ways as well, and finding out about what we will be and what we'll become. But it's sometimes you just got to wait. It's just time. You just got to.
It's whiskey. There's nothing that nothing takes the place of time with whiskey. And believe it, that they have tried. Hasn't been successful yet. So.
No. It's just, and it just, it's yeah, because like even at Laphroaig, we did quarter cask, which is smaller casks, kind of changing the aging profile. So it's just it just you can't get into a place to time. Not for salt or salinity, anyway.
Yeah. So sidebar just for a second. I forgot to write down that question, but I did want to ask you just about the quarter cask use. Because it's I don't think there's anyone else, certainly not large scale, doing that in Scotland. You do see smaller casks being used on this side of the Atlantic, but let's say generally when you see quarter cask finished and it's not directly from Laphroaig, you can kind of guess it's from Laphroaig because no one else is doing it. What led to using quarter casks there, and particularly I would say after hearing you say that one of your biggest concerns is over casking a whiskey.
Yeah, no, because we made that mistake so many times at the beginning with quarter cask because it was basically a 10-year-old into quarter cask, and that was like, oof, that was horrible. We left it for a year, and you'd be as well tuning a table as you wouldn't know you were drinking whiskey. And then we eventually changed things around, and we just had to put some younger liquid in there because it had to have Laphroaig DNA as well. So like we ended up changing all these things. The second maturation time came down from a year down to 6 months, and then we put basically 5 to 11-year-old whiskies. We ended up with a marriage of whiskies on the other side into the quarter cask for 6-7 months, and then that was it. That was where we ended up. But it took us from, I think the concept was 2001 to 2004 before we ended up it was launched in 2004, quarter cask. So that it took a long time to get it right, just because it just felt overcooked all the time. And it's like, nope. And then we were playing about with alcohol near the end too. And we used Friends Laphroaig to determine the alcohol, because most people would have done 46 and quarter cask was 48, just because it was just better. Yeah. We did the same with Sowing last year too with Lochlea. Mm-hmm. It was 48% alcohol, just because it was just better at 48 than 46. It just had a wee bit more vibrancy. Right, and it just felt better on the palate.
Right, and the two newer releases, the Harvest and the Our Barley, are both at 46 instead of 48. But again, that seems like that's just where they tasted best. And in both cases, despite having, I think both have 3 maturation casks associated with them, the malt's never lost. So, target achieved on that. And I would guess also you don't want to go below 46, because that's when you start to get flocking as you're non-chill filtering. Or it's a brand new year, the perfect time for a new whiskey experience. This January, my new experience is at Lochlea Distillery. Sitting on the lowland coast of Scotland, Lochlea is a relatively new distillery with some iconic names behind it. Set up by Malcolm Rennie and now overseen by John Campbell, Lochlea sits on a farm once tilled by the patron saint of everything Scottish himself, Robert Burns. Lochlea's first release, the Sowing Edition First Crop, was one of my top new whiskies of 2022 and one of the best first releases of the year. At the end of 2022, I picked up the newer Our Barley and Harvest Edition releases in advance of my own interview with John Campbell, and both were worthy follow-ups. Each built on the clean, barley-forward, and mildly lowland style of the Sowing Edition by layering in multiple cask finishes. Each comes in a patterned glass bottle, evoking the barley where all of this starts. Keep an eye out for early 2023. Their Fallow Edition is set to hit shelves in Q1, and I, for one, can't wait. The third in the annual series of limited seasonal bottlings, Lochlea Fallow Edition First Crop reflects the season of autumn on the farm, when the fields are left fallow to rest after a busy harvest. This will be the first Lochlea release to be matured solely in 100% first fill Oloroso sherry butts. As always, it is non-chill filtered with no coloring. It comes with a beautiful lavender label to match the rich colors of the previous seasonal bottlings. A big thank you to Impex Beverages for being the Whiskey Ring podcast presenting sponsor, and cheers to you all in a new year. Hey, Whiskey Ringers. I hope you've been taking advantage of that podcast-only code for the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. They've got around 20 bottlings coming out each month, and there's never a shortage of new things to explore. For the holiday season, December, January, we've got even more bottles than usual available to try and available to buy. If you are a US-based listener, there are at least 12 casks just for this month's release, plus additional ones coming out. If you are a UK listener or an EU listener, there are over 30, a ridiculous number of bottles that you can try and get your hands on. Remember to use code WRP at checkout to get 25% off your annual membership. And when you get that special bottle, post a picture on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and tag us at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring, Whiskey Ring Podcast, and hashtag Whiskey Ring to let us know you've got that great bottle in hand. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's non-filtered. Yeah, it's non-chill filtered, non-coloured. Yep.
Right.
That's yeah. We don't want flocculation.
Exactly. Can't go below there. All right. So that's kind of the cask aspect of it. And in various conversations, I've heard as high a number as 14 different cask types in the warehouses right now. I won't press on the exact number of that for sure, but to tie into the next topic, which is really diving into the process as we go into our last kind of segment. One of the, again, unique things about Lochlea is that you have different maturation styles. You've got a shorter one, a longer one, meant for different purposes. So the shorter one to get more interaction more quickly, get liquid out for sale, for tasting, and then a longer one for those 10, 15 plus year maturations. From your experience and when you're looking at these casks that you have available to you, what to you says, all right, this is a cask for long maturation. This is a cask for 2 to 3 or, well, I guess 3+ year maturation.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably the biggest thing we've changed over the last year. We don't do 2 types of whiskey anymore. We just do one.
Oh.
So, yep, we've changed that, David. So, yep. We just make one good one now, and it does both.
Hey, that's fair. When I heard about it, it was a bit unique. I didn't know people were doing that before.
Yeah, no, there was a guy called Jim Swan, and it was one of his techniques to do it's different cuts as well. So different cuts for the spirit and different mashing techniques basically allowed it to be either early or late maturing. But we've just gone to producing one type of spirit now. We needed to build more flexibility into when we had liquid available for bottling, really. So that was the main reason, and it's got good depth, the new spirit too. So that will slightly change things. Yeah.
Okay, fair, very fair. So that leads us into, again, it's the last, and I mean it's a big topic, but I always save it for last, which is simply the process. The really in-depth process. So the first thing to ask is, at Lochlea, working on Forsyth stills, they were custom made. When you obviously, again, we've spoken to your experience and your ability to say, if you want this, do this. If you want that, do that. Having said that, when you came over from Laphroaig to Lochlea, you're using what are to you new stills. How long did it take you to kind of get a feel for what you were working with?
I guess I knew kind of how things work. So I knew, going by what they were doing, what they were trying to achieve. I guess that's just what I've just learned all that. I was lucky enough to work with Robert Hicks back in the day, and he told me exactly like how a still worked, and this is what you would get, and this if you run it this way, this is what you would get, and when you take your cuts and you follow, this is how you do your cuts, and this is like, so like we would literally go through Laphroaig runs every 2.5 minutes, taking a sample. This is what it's doing. This is what it's doing. So I got a great in-depth training and basically how stills run, and this is what you're doing, and this is what you're trying to achieve if you do this. So I kind of understood what they were trying to do anyway. So it was just like, I'm there to compliment, I guess, more than anything else as well. So like just trying to help achieve the goal that Lochlea's trying to get. So I guess, yeah, we do a few slightly different things now, but it's like it's not hugely different. It's not hugely different. I guess the biggest difference is probably in mashing versus anything else.
Okay, well, we will definitely get there in a second. Uh, so just for people who don't have a visual right now on what the stills are, like what does the still setup look like?
Yeah, no, there's one wash still, 10,000 litre volume, and there's one spirit still, probably about 6.5, 7,000 litre volume. And the wash still is pretty traditional, kind of straight away. The spirit still has the bubble boil in it, which is probably another traditional Jim Swan thing, just to get more kind of copper contact. Moving through, so yep. Yeah, just I guess that's it. That'll produce sulfites that'll probably pay dividends in later years.
And we're talking direct fire, steam heated.
Steam kind of pans inside. Yeah, steam pans inside. Yeah.
So going back again, we're going to the process, but going back to this idea that you're coming on November 2021. Previously, Malcolm Rennie had been there. He helped with all the stages of creating the setup and the washbacks and the still type that they wanted. Without any offense or anything meant to Malcolm, were there any things that had you been there that you would have changed or wanted to change about the setup?
I don't know. That's a pretty hard question to answer as well, because yeah, I don't know what his beef was either. So so not really. It's a good site. It's well set up. So no, I don't think there's anything that I can say there that would have changed anything. No.
Okay. I mean, again, he's someone who obviously has a great deal of experience as well. So I doubt it would have been, not I doubt, I know it wouldn't have been an amateur setup to begin with, but it's always worth asking it whenever you get distillery, master distillers and equivalencies going in and saying, well, maybe let's change the angle of that line arm a little bit, or something like that. I'm always curious to see if people have their own styles that they prefer in those areas.
Yeah, no, and I think definitely from my point of view, it's not about that. It's about trying to maximize Lochlea. It's not about like what I want or that I'm a one-trick pony. I'm just trying to, I guess I'm trying to show that now with the fact that I'm moved from kind of probably polar opposites, to try and show that I can do things slightly differently as well. So yeah, no, just you've got to try and work with the circumstances and try and do the best with what you've got. And like the circumstances were good at Lochlea. So yeah, no, happy enough with all of that.
All right. So going through the process of making the whiskey and making from grain to bottle. Right now, all the barley is grown on site on the farm. Are there, and right now the volume can be handled by the farm. Any plans to expand that, either with expanding the farm, buying up more property surrounding, or adding in adjacent farms to the process?
I guess that's the plan. Soon we will own Ayrshire. So I guess yeah, not sure. We still have opportunity to grow a wee bit within that, but yeah, it's something. Hopefully, if things keep going the way they've been going this year, that we will have to look at. Yeah.
And I ask because there's another relatively new distillery in Scotland, Ardnamurchan, who's been very open about the fact that they're only going to be doing what they can do on their site. However many trees are on their site is how many, that everything is limited by that. And so that itself is a new concept to self-limit immediately. But I know, of course, the calling card of Lochlea is one of them has been only using the barley on site. So it was a necessary question, even if it's several years away.
I don't know. It's one of those things. It's just a bit of kind of, that question will be answered at some point, because we can produce a lot of barley on the site. So we'll see. I guess we'll see. We haven't got to that stage yet. We're a few years away from that, so we will see. But yeah.
So moving forward in the process, then, so you've got grain coming in. I know right now, as you mentioned, you're experimenting a little bit with in-house malting, but almost all of it is still off-site. I guess, what is the status of potentially malting on site?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's something we'll look at, something we've done this year, and it was tough this year. We were using trailers for steeps. We were using our new warehouse as the malting floor, and then using the barley dryer to dry the grain down to what we thought might be right for malted barley. So it wasn't so much about getting alcoholic yield. It was more about like the flavour profile and what it could be like if we did do it on the site ourselves. So the spirit character was really good. We just now need to find the way to try and get that in place, I guess, through one way or another. So I guess the main thing, spirit character is good. We have to try and find a building to get floor malting capability in it.
So then, just to dig a little bit deeper on that, would you consider it an inevitability that you'll have in-house malting at some point? Or if you're happy enough with the quality of malting being done outside, would you consider staying with the arrangement that you have now?
No, the biggest factor in that decision is that it'll change the spirit so much. Even more than, like you'd say, we've gone from 2 spirits to 1 spirit. It's a bigger change going from non-floor malted to floor malted. It will change the spirit completely. So it's a very, very tough and a very good strategic question for us to try and answer. Maybe we just do something like what Springbank or Kilhoman do, where they just do periods of 100% Islay or 100% local barley. Not sure. Customers will decide a wee bit as well, to be fair, so we'll well react to what they want. That'll keep us in business. So
sure.
We'll see. 4 to 5 years time, we'll understand that question a lot more.
All All right, fair. So we've got 2 points now to follow up. We've got 4 to 5 years for that, and about 10 years for the long maturing distillate. So, mark calendars now for sure.
To be honest, you've tasted some of the longest maturing distillate already.
I know, and I've quite enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So
no, we're blending. We're blending. Even now, long and short maturing, we are blending. So you will have tasted some of it, especially now barley.
And so the next step after that, of course, the mashing. And within the mashing, you mentioned that there's something a little different now, and it's one of the more unique aspects of Lochlea. So, I had points that I wanted to hit on of, the different yeast types and the types of washbacks that you're using, but I'm curious to just kind of let you go in terms of what's that story behind the mashing process.
So like there's basically, it's either how much turbidity you've got in your wort. So you either, and that's down to a couple of things, I guess, like raking and non-raking of the mash tun when you are filling your fermenter. And then again, same when you're filling your heater. So different levels of, you can go to so many variations in this as well. So the way you can do your water's different. You can basically just put on enough for like to fill your fermenter, and then it's almost like two processes. You put on enough water to fill your fermenter, and then you stop, and then you put on enough water to fill your heater for your next run, or it's just a smooth flow from one to the other, and you just move on and you move on and you move on. So we've moved from basically the first option I was talking about there to the second option, but it's just a flow now. It's just a flow. We do some raking and not some raking, so we do. We've introduced more of probably the clear wort into the process, which will give us more fruit in the fermentation. So we've done that. We have changed yeasts. If we move into the fermentations now as well, so we've moved the yeasts away from kind of dried yeasts to pressed yeast as well, and that's again giving us more fruits. So we are trying to double down on that because we had plenty grass and plenty cereal coming through in the spirit. So we have tried to double down on the fruit again, just giving us more variation and more depth coming through in that. So yeah, and that's something we've really concentrated on over the last probably year or so, just getting that dialed in, and like when we think we would because we're even from an efficiency point of view, we have really dialed into 1/10 of a degree for extract, etc. So we've really pushed, and the team's done amazingly well in trying to get the maximum extract out of the opportunity we have in front of us. So yeah, no, we've really pushed on both these fronts over the last year.
And moving from on the yeast topic in particular, moving from the dried yeast to the pressed yeast, are you now down to just one type, or are you still using multiples?
No, just one type.
Just one type?
Yep.
All right. Is this the one that happens to be from Belgium? I'm just curious.
No.
Oh, okay.
Away from both of them. Yep. Right. So we've just gone for a pressed yeast that's just gives us more fruit, and it gives us more flexibility again, just with what we're up to now.
Sure. And then the last question in the process, since we've kind of handled the after distillation aspect of it, is I'm sorry, 2 questions on that. First one is you mentioned, of course, the clear wort versus the semi-clear wort. When it's going into the still, are you distilling on grain, or is it all filtered out before it goes in?
It's full spout. Yep.
And then following that, Lochlea has this slow distillation, is how
Yes.
you described it. So it's not something I'm really familiar with for sure. And I'm just curious to hear, what does slow distillation look like?
So it needs to be slow at the beginning rather than slow all the way through. So basically, you've gone to all the trouble of producing these fruity flavors. If you distill too fast, they'd be gone. You wouldn't get them. So it's all about harnessing them. So like if you distill nice and slowly, especially in your wash distillation, your first distillation, you will harness and hold all these fruit flavors into the spirit type. So really, it's the first distillation or the wash distillation that we've slowed down even slower, and then we then build it up slowly, rather than running at the same speed all the way through. And it's off when it's off. We start slowly and ramp up, just because we're trying to harness all these fruit flavors.
So how long would a typical, let's say, first run distillation take then, if following a slow process?
Probably about 8 hours.
About 8 hours. Okay. And then, so that's the first, is that including both stills or just the first still?
That's the first still. Second
Just
still's
first.
a wee bit quicker. Yeah, it's probably about 6.5, 7 hours. Second distillation.
Gotcha. And do you, just because again it's a very small distillery, are you and team, are you running kind of a the one distillation one day, hold it, and then do the second distillation the next day, or do you do an overnight shift to kind of run continuous?
No, we do batch. It's just batches. So it's basically one batch every day. So we will do one mash, which fills one fermenter, and we empty one fermenter into the wash still, and we do a distillation run all on the same day. So it's just like one mash, one wash distillation, one spirit distillation every Monday to Friday. So yeah, so we do have two different lengths of fermentation as well. So we have 64 hours or 114 hours for the longs. So that again will add slightly different flavour profiles into our spirit vat at the end of the week.
And I imagine the shorter one would also increase those fruity notes that you're looking for.
Not quite. It's just a wee bit too short.
Just too short. Okay.
It's just too short. If we got to like the kind of 80-hour mark, it would be perfect then. But the older ones are more kind of grassy, and so they'll come through that way.
Gotcha. And you can't go much past, at 114. It's what, we're entering day 6, end of day 5, day 6 of that. Just doing back,
Yeah,
in my head.
Yeah, almost day 5. Yep.
Almost day 5. By the end of day 6 or 7, you'd have just yeast just dying there because there's nothing more to eat. So
yeah, no, and that's the thing. It's sometimes people look for that, but it's not a flavour we're looking for right now.
All right. So with the last couple of minutes we have, and I always keep it to a tight time frame there. I'm going to do the very last topic, which some people might look at as kind of the biggest thing of the area, which is simply the connection with Robert Burns.
Yep.
So Robert Burns basically as close to a saint in Scotland as you can get for a non-religious figure. Short of also royalty. And of course, there's a personal connection with him. Farmed the site for 7 years, grew up right there.
Yeah.
And, looking at just a list of people who lived or were born in Ayrshire, he's far from the only well-known figure. I mean, there's other ones too, but because he's got the Lochlea, that farm specifically, there is a strong connection. So I won't waste your time going through all the full story of Robert Burns there. Actually, if you want to read that, do visit the website. And their website, Lochlea's website, and also my review of the Sowing Edition went into that a bit. But the question that I really wanted to ask about it was, you've got this historical figure of huge significance to the country, to the people in the area.
Absolutely.
And we've seen this in whiskeys across the world. You know, if you have a figure that's important there, that they capitalize on the name, the connection, you get named editions and all of this. And Lochlea has been quite clear about, you know, we're not going to have a Gaelic named whiskey. It's not going to have, we're not going to have a, you know, Robert Burns edition, or at least not a Burns named whiskey. And of course, I won't hold you to that, you know, however long in the future, but there's a balance to be had between marketing and character.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, especially from your seat, not only from your previous position, but also what you've seen in the first year there. How is the company managing to balance the association with such a figure without the whiskey getting lost behind that association?
No, and it's definitely, it's an anecdotal story more than something the main topic of discussion for us. It's just like, he is probably Scotland's favourite son ever, and always will be held in that regard, rightly so, as well. But he just happened to live at Lochlea 245 years ago. That's something we talk about and we're proud about, but it's not the main story. It's like, the main story is the whiskey, and we have to keep the focus being on the whiskey now. And we use some of the terminology in our packaging, and some of the, it will set some of the tones for the brand and the distillery as a whole, but like, it's not who we are. It's not wholly who we are. We're proud of that history, absolutely, as well. But yeah, it's more of an anecdotal story that, oh, do you know, he happened to live here 245 years ago as well with his dad, when he dad tenanted the farm for 7 years. So yeah, it's more that, because it's just like, Lochlea needs to be real on its own 2 feet, rather than trying to use the shadow of somebody else to be who we are. We need to just be who we are, and with these lovely extra stories.
I think that's a fantastic way to close out our chat. So, John, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about Lochlea, to talk about your experience and history. Once the episode comes out, there will be links to, of course, the website, to all social media, to reviews on whiskeyinmyweddingring.com. You can also, of course, take a look at your local liquor store for not only the Sowing Edition, it's probably sold out by now, but the Harvest Edition and the Our Barley should be in stores now. I picked up mine last weekend. So definitely take a look for those. And, you know, I'll have reviews for those as well. Other than that, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. There are 4 slots, remaining on the Whiskey Ring podcast and Patreon for the Bottle Share Club. Get a chance to try some of these incredible whiskeys. And with that, again, I will thank you, John, for taking the time today.
No, thanks so much, David, and for inviting me onto the podcast. And yeah, hopefully learn a few bits and pieces about me and Lochlea, and yeah, hopefully be over in the States soon. See you then.
Perfect. Hang on with me for just a second, and then I'll let you go. It's been another episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Thanks for listening.